The following is a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
Welcome to the System is Down.
How are more people not talking about this? or maybe they are, and I'm just not paying attention. Seriously, it blows my mind that this case still to this day isn't a bigger deal than it is. If you don't think this case affects your own life in any way, then you're failing to realize a few things. The men, women, and yes, children in this story are real humans, real citizens of the country that you probably are living in right now. And the government that they had at that time that they were dealing with is the exact same government that we have today. How are we okay with this? What's up, Downers? Welcome back to another great episode of The System is Down, the place where we weekly have uncomfortable conversations, ask the hard questions, and look for the answers together. Thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time every single Monday to do my very best to expand my own knowledge and hopefully yours in the process. I trust that you shared the show with someone new, as I requested last week, and if not, shame. Shame on you. Just go ahead, press pause right now, send a text to just one person, tell them about the show and what we've got going on here. I think it's important. I really do. I mean, we might still be a baby podcast just nearing the end of our first year of infancy, but let me tell you something. We are going to change the world. You and me. I know. It's crazy, right? But we're going to do it. Mark my words. We're going to do it, and it's not going to be hard either. I mean, just look at Facebook, look at social media, look at the mainstream media. Every one of these major influences in your life, they're all preaching the exact same thing. Be mad at each other. The person you disagree with is your enemy, right? Guess what? They're not, okay? They're just not. And we're proving that. We're proving that every time we have these uncomfortable conversations and just talk to each other like humans, like equals. Every time we disagree on a topic, but civilly and respectfully hear each other out. When we do that one simple thing, we are bucking the trend and saying to the system, no. Why? What is this adding to my short little existence on this earth? Drama sells, hate sells, division sells. Let's stop buying it. Who would have thought that the new punk rock, the new fight the system would be just talking to each other and listening, respecting each other? When the hell did that become so foreign to us, so weird? So it might sound cheesy or far-fetched, but I'm sticking to it. I'm sticking to this idea, and I've seen too much good come of it already to stop now, and you guys are helping. You guys are doing a great job of getting this idea out there. If you're with me on this, please just go share the show and let's build this crazy, crazy idea of not being dicks. How hard is that? And if you like the show and you'd like to support us further and help us grow, then you can go join the Downers Club for just $1 or more. And in return, I'll give you a bunch of weekly bonus audio content. We typically do 2 to 3 bonus episodes every single week. And you can sign up for that at tsidpod.com/support. All right. So today, Craig, Justin, and I are continuing our conversation about the American tragedy that is the Waco incident. The first half of this discussion was back in episode 40, and we'll be jumping right back into the middle of that conversation. So if you haven't heard part 1, you should definitely go check that out first. Again, that is episode 40. The more I dig into this case, the more it just baffles me that most people seem to think it was just a simple open and close case about some crazy cult. If even a shred of this information is true, then it really needs to be talked about. So let's get back into it. With all that said, and without further ado, let's go weird. Janet Reno, let's go.
All right, so basically, and some of this is slipping my mind right now, but I chiefly remember that Janet Reno was worried about the children, and I kind of believe she actually really was worried about the children. Now, to the extent of her involvement of signing off the plan of the insertion of CS gas to, I believe what they thought would happen is the parents would be like, I'm so afraid of my kid getting hurt, I'm going to run out with my kids so they don't deal with it and not let my kid be gassed.
But if they think that there was like child abuse going on and like these parents don't care about their kids, then why would that be the case?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, anyway, point being, they came up with on the 19th, they early in the morning. It's a very windy day. It's worth clarifying that. It's an important point. The FBI starts these tanks with these giant sort of
barrels.
On the front of it are going in and puncturing the outside of Mount Carmel, this building. They're puncturing, breaking into the wall, and as they're doing that, they're announcing over their loudspeaker that they're inserting CS gas. It's non-toxic. They're not raiding the building, and that's all they're doing. Like, they're just letting them know this is not a raid. They're not going in, but
it's cool, guys. We're just gonna like punch holes in the side of your house and rain some chemicals in. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they're go on.
Well, I was just gonna say they put so much. They end up like within like 2 hours running out of CS gas because they're just constantly dumping it and dumping it and dumping it in there one by one. So that compound or building or whatever just had to have been like completely filled with this.
Yeah.
Did they have? I mean, is there a law or is there a reason that they gave for doing that, for knocking holes inside of the building and pumping gas into it? Or just, this is going on too long, as I know, we want to end it?
Yeah. It almost seemed like, because like we mentioned before, David was working on these seals, and the negotiation team, they honestly thought they were getting somewhere at this point. And it was like I said, the tactical team was on a different page. Somebody decided at some point that enough's enough. We need to get this finished now. And the CS gas supposedly was the safest way to drop it in there and have people come out. It would basically force them out, like snuff them out pretty much, because like I said, it's damn near impossible to breathe in that situation. So you would think, or they supposedly thought, that they would just come flooding out after the insertion of the gas.
Yeah. This is where things get a little weird, because I think it was they had finished inserting gas sometime before noon. I want to say maybe 11:40 or something in the morning. I don't remember the exact time. I don't think I wrote it down. Mm-hmm. And then a fire started shortly after. So now here's the big question. The FBI, the government, asserts that it was the Branch Davidians who started the fire.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of reasons why that's suspect. Couple points I want to bring up. One of the reasons that the FBI claims the Branch Davidians started the fire was that they had planted bugs on the outside of Mount Carmel beforehand so they could kind of hear what's going on when there were some people closer to the outside. Mm-hmm. And they had heard a few of the Davidians talking about something of if there is going to be a raid, if the FBI decides to enter Mount Carmel, that they were going to create a wall of fire, and they were sort of invoking some sort of biblical metaphors, that this wall of fire would protect them from the army of Babylon, and that to prepare for this, they were spreading some hay and getting some
diesel fuel and stuff.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. So what's interesting to note is if the FBI knew that, like if they had the bugs and they say, "Oh, we knew that they were going to start a fire," why would they insert the gas? Why would they puncture the holes into this building, turning it into what someone called a giant potbelly stove, kind of, with the way the air flow through?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The holes they punched are what you would do, like if your grill is not heating up fast enough, you open the vents in the bottom of it where airflow can pour through that and increase the oxygen goes in and increases the flame. All puncturing the holes did, especially on that windy of a day, was make sure if that place caught on fire, it was going to go really freaking fast.
That's interesting. I didn't even catch that when I was going through the stuff. So, yeah.
So there's a couple other things worth pointing out. Just all these pieces of evidence, because it's really hard to actually, definitively say what happened. We can just sort of look at the data and see what was most likely. Now, they had cut off all power to the place, during the 51 days. And so they were using gas lamps for lighting. So it's not too far-fetched to imagine that these lamps were moved around in various places, and that could have been part of what helped build the fire up, in addition to all the CS gas that was settling everywhere. But the real question is, all right, so there's all these flammable stuff. Where did the spark come from? And that's where it gets kind of weird, because the FBI claims that the way that they were administering the gas was what's non-incendiary, right?
Right. Yeah. There wasn't like a spark inducing. It wasn't like like if you see, sometimes when they shoot gas canisters, they'll like blow, like there'll be just like a little blow where there's a detonation to like spread the gas. These were not like a detonated explosion. It was just basically like a release where it just comes out of it, versus a detonated thing where you'd see like an initial spark or something like that. So I don't know what the word is. I'm guessing what you said was accurate because it sounded really smart. Right. So
non-incendiary.
Yeah.
There you go.
So they claimed that was the case, but what's interesting to note is that after the fact, I think there were 6 shell casings of the things that would administer the gas that were found after the fact. And the technical details for these showed that these were in fact incendiary, that they were the ones that would have a spark. They would potentially set things on fire.
Right. And what it was like 4 of them came from what would be a 203 round, I think is what it is. It just like it comes off of like your weapon. Like if you have like an AR-15 or an M16, whatever they were carrying around, they'll have like a grenade launcher on the bottom of it, and those can shoot gas canisters. And those gas canisters are incendiary, whatever word you just use. The ones that they were dropping from tanks weren't, but 4 or however many they recovered, at least 4 were shot from these grenade launchers, which would have been the spark producing kind, which would have been potentially an ignition for the flame. So
so let's
keep going.
So I'm just gonna say, so let's set the scene. It's afternoon, multiple fires have started, and as these fires are burning, the tanks were, they had destroyed the building, parts had collapsed. There were various areas where the Davidians were, they thought they were hiding, and then they were getting trapped and they were being moved around. But the point is, very few Davidians actually made it out of the building alive in the front part of it. The ones that did suffered massively severe burns. Now, where it gets kind of sketchy is the fact that after the fire was done, after the building had burned down and they started recovering the bodies, was assessing the corpses of the people that were left behind. Now, we had mentioned that CS gas was being used in there, and the FBI, I believe they knew that the kids wouldn't have gas masks that would fit them for that. The parents, the only adult size ones. So I think that they had found out that the parents were just literally using like wet blankets to try to cover their mouths, and so they weren't breathing all this in and getting in their eyes. Mm-hmm. But now here's where it gets. This is just really painful to talk about. But I'm trying to remember what it was called, but it's like the CS gas, when ignited, turns into I'm blanking on it. It's that hydrogen cyanide. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't see this part.
No idea.
It's what they use in the death penalty for when they administer to kill people.
Gotcha.
And you know how when they had those people strapped down, the reason that happens is because
they convulse.
Their muscles convulse. Mm-hmm. So they had found these kids with their backs bent backwards, and it was just these kids died an unspeakable way.
Yeah, if the gas didn't kill them initially, their bodies contorting and contracting to these muscle spasms that they could not handle. That's just horrifying.
I have one, because we'll probably get into the more like crazier theories and stuff. So I got a theory about the children too, because they were in the bunker at that point, weren't they?
Yeah, they were in the bunker. The women and children were in the bunker, and we'll get to the bunker situation in a bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I wanted to say there were also
No,
the school bus was buried underground. This was like it was like cement or
this was a concrete vault is what it was.
Yeah.
It was at the bottom of the there's a 4-story tower in the middle of the compound, and the very bottom floor had been like a records vault at some point, and it was made out of concrete, and they were using it at this point as a bunker. So
go on, Justin.
No problem. So there were many corpses recovered that had bullet holes in them, and the claim by the FBI, a couple of claims were that it couldn't have been the FBI because the FBI didn't fire any shots at all. If we remember, on the initial day, the initial shootout was between the ATF and the Branch Davidians. The FBI wasn't involved yet, and the FBI claimed that they did not shoot anybody. So they claimed that these bullet holes that were found in these Davidians were either self-inflicted or mercy killings by other Davidians, but the evidence seems to not really point to that from what they recalled. But the fact is, we don't actually have any evidence of what happened to these corpses, because the corpses, and this was, you can't make this up. Like, this just seems like there's no way. But the corpses, when they were being transferred, they were put in these trucks that would refrigerate them, and the trucks didn't have their electricity turned on or something to cool them. So these corpses just deteriorated beyond any
recognition. Yeah.
So don't really have
coincidence,
other than some of the photographs that were taken at the time.
Are you kidding me?
Autopsies are not really that useful.
So the Branch Davidians, to clarify, the Branch Davidians, there's the people that have been sitting outside with guns for like the last 51 days, and they poke a couple holes in it. That's all they did. They put in some gas, and then the Branch Davidians lit their house on fire and started shooting each other.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't get into this stuff. I didn't get this deep in the couple documentaries that I watched. So please go on. This is horrifyingly interesting.
So I mean that's really the end of it. There's a couple more things that we really need to talk about, specifically something I had not mentioned yet, which was the FLIR footage that was taken. And I think this is what really convinced me that something was going on. So we were mentioning earlier, why were there bullet holes in people? Why did these people not run out? Well, the FBI claims that they weren't shooting anybody. Now, this might also, now that I think about it, be a very clever word game. But let me just explain what the FLIR footage was. They had this plane that was, maybe it was a helicopter, actually. I don't think it was a plane. But it was basically taking infrared footage, which lets you build like a heat map of what the hot and cool objects are relative to each other as the events unfold, where you can see the tanks doing their thing. And on the infrared footage, you see what appear to be automatic weapon fire.
Yeah.
And not only near the tank, but in the courtyard in the back, shooting into where the Davidians would have tried to escape had they been running out the back.
Yeah, it was like the last non-caved-in door, exit at this point. And this FLIR specialist, you probably saw the one guy that was showing videos that were taken, and he was just kind of breaking it down, and he was saying how the flashes were so fast. My notes say 1/30th of a second, which nothing in nature flashes that fast, that consistently. So somebody was like, oh, it could have been a reflection off a mirror or something, which wouldn't give off a heat pattern, because the infrared picks up a heat pattern is what that does. And so this guy was sitting here saying how from what he was describing, it looked like a tank pulls up to this last exit that hasn't collapsed. 2 or 3 FBI agents or soldiers or whatever you want to call them at this point roll out of this tank and just unload automatic fire into this last exit, as this place is in an inferno. So they're sitting here saying, well, why didn't they come out? I can't believe they didn't come out. Well, you're shooting into the last method of escape.
Yeah.
And that FBI obviously denies this. Oh, we never fired a shot. That's something else. That was a reflection, or that was this or that. And this guy's basically saying he's the most knowledgeable person on the system. I think he helped invent the system. And so he's sitting here saying there is no possible explanation besides automatic machine gun fire.
Dude,
nothing else could.
The muzzle of the gun was just reflecting really quickly off
Right,
sunlight.
exactly.
That's all.
So it's also worth noting that I believe 60 Minutes actually did a report as well and came to a similar conclusion that it must have been weapons fire, but then eventually retracted their claim and didn't want to talk about it anymore. And it's not
Of course.
far-fetched to question why that might have been the case.
Cool.
Right.
Well, this FLIR footage becomes very important because the government, as you were saying, denies that it was weapons fire, that it was just sunlight reflecting off of stuff. And in one of the documentaries, the third one, is called the FLIR Project. What they basically do is after this whole thing happens, there is another committee put together to sort of attempt to debunk the FLIR footage, the footage that the defense was saying was weapons fire, by trying to recreate the events by making go into a new place, making the area look the same, similar weapons, similar getup, similar weather conditions. And then they're like, see, we did all this, and look, we shoot the guns, and there's no, we take the footage, we don't see anything, or we can't see this or that. Well, the documentary that they did on it, which was critiquing the committee's attempt to prove the government's case, showed that they used different weapons, they used different ammunition. They had soaked the entire ground the night before. They had messed up with the landscape. They had just pretty much everything did not hold up. They just changed everything and just assumed no one would check it. And when they actually used the same weapons, the same ammunition, everything, you could see the muzzle flashes. You could see it. It showed up on the infrared footage. It was just
That's
that's
like when they tried to go back and computer generate the World Trade Center falling, and how they tried to reproduce that on a computer image, and the only way they could get it to do what they wanted to was by like completely disconnecting cables and stuff like that. So it's
Defying
just altering
and logic.
Yeah, altering things to give them the results they wanted, and that sounds exactly like what they were doing back then on trying to not reproduce this FLIR footage here. Just
right.
So basically, I think we've covered the majority of all the events, and we can get to the aftermath and reassessing everything. But there's one final thing we haven't touched on, and that was something that was really expanded upon in the second documentary, Waco: A New Revelation, and that's about the presence of the Delta Force operatives at the on the 19th. Mm-hmm. And it makes me think about when the FBI said the FBI didn't make any shots, maybe they meant it. And maybe it wasn't the FBI making shots, it was the Delta Force doing the shots. And
right.
That's who I think. And there's actually, during that second documentary, there were former military people saying that, Delta Force was there. Delta Force was involved on site. And that it was Delta Force who were not only shooting at the Davidians, but, and I think you had alluded to this earlier, Craig, we were talking about the bunker and the women and children, and there was a hole on top of the bunker where it looks to be where a shape charge was placed and exploded, because the rebar is bent in as if it exploded. Mm-hmm. And it's as if the Delta Force operatives placed that there because they might have thought that Koresh was in the bunker. And had anyone been inside the bunker when it happened, chances are they would have been blown up. And
well, that's what I was getting at with you said the bodies were contorted and stuff. A lot of the children, the cause of death was blunt force trauma, not the CS gas or suffocation. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, and most of those kids were from inside of that room. So if all that concrete had blown down on them, yes, they would have died from blunt force trauma. What else in that situation?
No, they were lighting their own compound on fire. They were shooting each other in the face, and they were running around hitting their children with like cinder blocks.
The kids were running into the walls is what they were doing.
That's the way that this makes the most sense.
And to get weirder, the chunk of the vault that had this hole in it, it can't be found anymore.
Right, because there was a pile of all the concrete from that compound that they were trying to go dig it up and look at it, and that specific piece where the rebar was bent, that's gone.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Probably the door.
There's no evidence of that. The door's gone. The damning videos are gone. So it's just a lot of covering, and When you talk about Delta Force, if people don't know, this is basically a special ops military. I think it's Army, isn't it? An Army detachment. I'm pretty sure it's military. It's used mostly for like hostage rescue and counterterrorism in like other countries. It's not typically used on American civilians.
Yeah.
And
it's not used on one crazy guy who has people that are following him.
Right.
I think who might have some guns.
Combat Applications Group.
Right. Definitely. Isn't there specifically laws against the use of military force against civilians? I mean, I don't know the specific laws and stuff, but that just seems like if it's not, it should be a law, because that's what we have law enforcement for.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, people admitted to Delta Force being on site. Initially, they admitted to members of Delta Force were just there in the planning part, like in like the training and stuff like that, and they were just they weren't in the operations. They weren't pulling triggers or anything like that. They were just there to do the planning stages and stuff and just make sure everything goes smoothly. But then people come out later and said there were as many as like 8 to 10 Delta Force members on site as part of the operation the day of this final, I would call it an attack personally, but standoff between the Davidians and the FBI. So, like you said, maybe the FBI didn't pull the triggers, but I know for a special ops group, for them to be on site, their job, in their mind at least, their job is to go in, get the job done, and get out. That's their job. So they're not worried about negotiation or hostage negotiations. If they're called in, they're just there specifically to get the job done.
They are the end game. Something is going to happen right now.
So I think what would be good to talk about what happened in the aftermath, after the fire, after the compound burned down. Majority was 76 Davidians, I think, were killed the final day. So over 88.
How many children were there? Do you remember?
I want to say like 20. That sounds like a number.
Something
Maybe
like
20,
that.
Something like that.
I know it was upwards of 20, in the 20s at least.
More than one, and that's the problem.
So yeah.
More than zero, rather.
Craig, you sent out the flamethrower allegations. Is there any like basis?
I was just going to get to that. I was going to get to some of the crazier, like less proven facts. Like a lot of what Justin's talking about is like these are the facts of it, or at least these are pretty well understood. I think at the end I was going to get into some of the less known or more crazier things that at least if you look into it, you're going to run into at least. Sure. So I think we should at least address. So, I mean, we can talk about that now, or we can finish up this. I
want to finish up with what happened with the court cases and everything like that, and what happened with the actual surviving Davidians.
Yeah, go ahead.
So of the Davidians that actually survived and made it out alive and unmaimed, so they went to court, and what's surprising is that the jury found them not guilty, all of them. And for the deaths of the ATF agents on the
murder, it found him not guilty of murder or conspiracy to commit murder were the two that they were acquitted of.
Right.
Initially.
Now, this is where it gets kind of sketchy. I think it was almost everyone on the jury except two of them were like, no, that these guys were defending themselves. This is not, we're not going to get them. So they told them that, we want to find them innocent. It was something like, the judge was like, all right, I'm going to let them go, but they found them guilty of another.
It was they found them guilty of the weapons charge itself, which and then the judge went to throw that one out initially because he's like, well, if they weren't guilty of this or this, then this one they're not guilty of, and so he was going to throw it all out.
But then he came back and changed his mind.
And then he changed his mind and found him guilty of all of them because he flipped it. He's like, well, because they're guilty of this weapons charge, they're guilty of all of it, pretty much. And so
they were sentenced to 40, I think upwards. I think the maximum for some of them was 40 years. Now it's worth noting that as of 2007, they're all out. So all the Davidians they're out of jail, the ones that survived. And but there's one of them.
If any of you have contact with them, please send them to the show, and I will certainly have them on.
Especially that one guy that talked a lot for them.
No, I'm trying to remember his name. I want to say it's like Doyle, Clyde,
Clive and Doyle. Yeah. Yeah, it was Clive Doyle or Clive and Doyle or something like that.
I'm trying to remember what his name was. Yeah, Clive Doyle. He was such a nice guy too. Just as a tangent, like
just listening to him, like he would get after the fact. Obviously, he was like really emotional, but just seeing him like give his testimony, he'd like cry on the stand and stuff like that. Man, I really felt for this guy because I didn't feel like he was trying to like pull the wool over anybody's eyes or what's that?
Not trying to manipulate the situation or anything.
Right.
Like, he's just saying what he saw.
Right. This is all like emotional response.
Believe him.
What's that?
I said I believe him. Basically.
I do too.
I sensed a lot of sincerity in his testimony and what he was saying, and I think he's been pretty outspoken after the fact. He's done a lot of interviews and talked about it a lot, and has stuck. I think he's stuck by what he said actually happened.
Let's get Clive on the show. Let's do it.
Yeah. So I think we really covered it all. I definitely want to, Craig, I definitely want to get into some of the more interesting stuff. But to summarize just the whole thing, 80 plus people were killed unnecessarily. They were murdered for maybe Koresh did do something bad. You know what? Probably he did. I don't really believe that he was necessarily an upstanding guy.
Sure.
But
so
it didn't justify
once again,
what happened to these kids.
Go in, talk to them, arrest him.
Right. Well, here, one thing I want to talk about briefly is they had their inside guy. The ATF had their mole, or whatever you'd call him, go in to pretend he's one of the Davidians. So this guy knows, because their entire message was apocalyptic, the government's going to come in on us, and we're going to either triumph or we're not, but either way, there's going to be a battle at some point.
Right.
For him, so he knows all this stuff because they're constantly talking about it. So for him to come back out, and I'm sure he laid it out to them, this is what they understand, this is what they believe. They believe we're going to come in and do attack and stuff like that. Basically, for them to know the type of belief system or mindset that the Davidians were in, for them to react the way they did, it was almost like they either the craziest part, David Koresh was a prophet and God told him all this stuff would happen, and it happened exactly how it would happen. Right. Or B, the FBI or ATF kind of heard this is what they believe, and they basically pushed them to that point. Like, because every step the FBI took was basically a step that David Koresh had said, oh, they're going to come in with fire, they're going to come in and attack us. And so I just think the fact that they reacted the way they did in this situation just escalated things so much worse because of them, almost intentionally, because they knew the belief system that the Davidians had, how they planned on this stuff to eventually, in the end times, to happen. So I don't know. It's just bizarre how they would. You just see in some of the documentaries how they did know, like you said, supposedly there was talks about like being saved in the fire and stuff like that. So for them to even like come close, like give a situation where fire could happen, like just perpetrating that situation where they're busting the holes or putting in the CS gas. It's like, well, if you knew, hey, they might be lighting themselves on fire, why would you make it more possible for them?
Yeah, it's like bizarre. It's very bizarre. It's like all his prophecies came true in one way or another. Whether he was doing it or clearly they were assisting it, and which would only lend credence for the followers to not like bail on Koresh. Right. Like they're gonna be like, dude, everything you said, they're doing that right now. Like, why would they bail at that point? Why
would they leave him at this point when even if the say the FBI is just doing it to egg him on, it's just like in their minds this is happening because this
is
guy,
prophecy. This is the end
this
times.
Guy is their messenger. This is their prophet, and he says this is going to happen. All of a sudden, it happens. They're like, "Oh shit, this is actually happening. We can't bail on this guy because he's obviously who he says he is."
Right. Hey, Dan Smots here. I'm taking a second to interrupt myself talking to talk about myself because, I don't get paid a penny for the hours and hours that I put into creating this show for you guys in your greedy little ears, and I've got a family to feed. To make that happen, I run my own media business called Goulash Media. If you have a need in anything from video production to graphic design to audio production and beyond, you can get it all for a painfully fair price at Goulash Media. In video, I do weddings, music videos, commercials, pageants, plays, etc., etc., etc. For design, I do photo editing, album art, logos, branding, business cards, merchandise, you name it. For audio, I do engineering, production, editing, jingles, and, well, podcasts. So if you've got a media need of any kind, or if you'd just like to give a little something back and help keep my children fed, check out all the endless options at my website, goulashmedia.net. That's goulash, Goulash, media.net, where we cater to the little guy with the big vision. Okay.
So usually you'd think that they would try to talk these people out of it and try to discredit somebody like David Koresh, not completely validate everything that he's saying.
Yeah, and for me, even I don't agree with him. I don't think that he was right necessarily. But yeah, like even for him, he's certainly convinced himself. He memorized the Bible from front to back, and he knows all of it, whatever. And he's like, I'm interpreting it as I am this guy that is bringing this message, and people will come against me with fire, and they will come against me and tear me down. Like, at that point, you can't even blame him for believing his quote-unquote craziness, because he's speaking truth. It's happening, and they're fulfilling the prophecy.
Yeah. So if you wanted to go talk about some of the weirder stuff, and actually I kind of wanted to give some context to Craig, so let's talk about that flamethrower.
All right. So, like I said, there's what we already talked about is mostly understood stuff, and then this other stuff I want to get into is more of the what the hardcore conspiracy theorist or the people that just
rational
are
people.
Really rational, irrational. I don't. Anyway, these are some of the more bizarre theories that aren't necessarily proven fact. There's not evidence for or against it. It's just people saying things. But the first one is this video I had seen literally a few hours ago, and I sent it to both of you. It's of a tank. It appears to be a tank, and it's really bad, like Bigfoot type footage, like super grainy, grainy footage of a tank busts through the wall with its barrel, like we had said it was doing with the gas, and what the narrator describes it as, when it's pulling out, it appears to be flames coming out of the tip of the barrel. Right. When it goes in, it comes out, you can see flames, and then it goes back in and comes out in flame. It's really hard to tell. It just looks really bright, and
yeah,
to me, it could be understood as flames if that's what you're looking at it as. So, right. Justin, you have an explanation, apparently.
Well, the guy in that video said, obviously and apparently, or something to that effect. And I'm watching it, I'm like, as a guy who believes that that's probably the case, still watching it, I'm like, nah, I didn't necessarily see what he's talking about.
Wasn't it a woman in the video?
Yeah, it was a woman talking, is who it was.
Right, so just to give some context, and this is sort of interesting because even amongst the conspiracy folks, there was some controversy. So I believe that footage was from one of the first documentaries done about Waco called Waco, The Big Lie. Have you guys heard of that one?
Yeah.
I've heard the name. I've not watched it.
I think I watched The Lie. I don't think I watched that one. I think I watched The Big Lie Continues or something like that, which was produced like, it was like 10 years later or something like that.
So Waco, The Big Lie, and then its sequel, Waco 2, The Big Lie Continues, were done by this woman, Linda Thompson, and she was this like right-wing militia movement supporting conspiracy theorist, and she, believed that the government was behind a lot of this. And what's interesting to note is the guy who made Rules of Engagement, Mike McNulty, he actually made Rules of Engagement with the chief, the initial goal of just discrediting Linda Thompson's Waco, The Big Lie. Like he thought that she was just full of nonsense. And in that clip you're specifically talking about, it's more than likely that was just cloth that just happened to look like fire. And after having been told it looks like cloth and watching it again, I can see it as cloth too. So,
but what if it was FLIR footage?
Actually, that would be a good point. Like, wouldn't the fire show up on the FLIR footage? And I don't remember that being FLIR footage.
Right. I don't think it was. Nobody mentioned that it was FLIR footage. Otherwise, that would be way more compelling evidence for me because nothing else would be that bright.
Mm-hmm.
But I think McNulty said something along the lines of, she might as well have been right after what he had found out,
Nice.
which is the truth that we've been discussing this entire time.
So interesting. You talk about the that lady producing the Big Lie and Big Lie 2, because some of these conspiracies actually came from the Big Lie 2 or whatever, Big Lie Continues, which I have found no proof to back this up other than other people just talking about it, is that possibly 3 of the 4 or 2 of the 4 initial ATF agents that were killed in the first raid were Bill Clinton's bodyguards or Secret Service during his campaign. Like I said, that would be an awesome, incredible story because of all the quote-unquote Hillary body count and stuff like that. And so I obviously had to go look for that, and I didn't really find anything that, like, tried to find their biographies and stuff like that. Just, what do you mean, why?
I mean, why does that need to be the thing? Just to prove that, Bill Clinton sent these people in directly, or what are you saying?
Well, that is one of the conspiracies that
Delta Force would have had to have come from the White House.
Directly from the president.
Gotcha.
Or the White House. And there is actual evidence, or there's a witness that says during the Whitewater scandal investigation, which was the Whitewater scandal actually would have happened when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, and drugs were being peddled in and out of Mexico through Arkansas. And at some point, this was being investigated while he was president. And I don't know all the details of this, but this is where it gets kind of weird and shady. Somebody had an office during this investigation, and Waco papers were spotted in with these Whitewater papers. And very shortly after, that guy committed suicide. And then...
Wait, are we talking
Did he shoot
about...
himself in the back of the head?
What's the guy's name?
No, are we talking about... oh, gosh, why am I blanking on his name? It was...
Foster. It was Foster. I haven't written down.
Vince Foster. We're talking about Vince Foster.
Not reading my own notes, apparently. So there's apparently in his office, after he committed suicide, a bunch of documents just were taken, not disappeared. They were taken out of his office. And there is, the guy is on the stand at this trial or something, or congressional hearing, and they're asking him, like, did you take documents out of his office? Or did you see so-and-so take documents out of his office? And he said yes. And they were like, do you know did she say where she was taking the documents? Yes. Where was she taking them? To the White House. Who was she taking them to? She was apparently the First Lady's, like, aide or something. Like, one of her, which would be Hillary Clinton's aides. So ties are not to the White House. There's ties to the White House because of this situation. Or, like he said, Delta Force would have had to have come from the White House. So, in my opinion, if anything, it was probably just a big covering from the White House more than anything. Especially if the president ordered Delta Force to come in. If there was evidence in this guy's office, the guy commits suicide. Let's get that evidence out of there before people start searching his office. Because wasn't there like an investigation of his office about to happen, Justin, after he committed suicide?
Yeah,
I don't know if you remember the details of that. I think they had ordered like an investigation of everything in his office after he killed himself. And so before that investigation happened, these documents disappeared. So say there's some shady dealing where he does order, even if it's not for something more nefarious than, dude, we got to get this done. Let's get Delta Force in there. Well, there's paperwork linking the president to that. Yeah, they're going to want to get rid of that, I would think, just to cover their asses.
Yeah.
But, I mean, obviously conspiracy theorists go even further, saying this thing with the ATF agents, maybe they had witnessed something, like while he was during his campaign, like Bill Clinton's... whatever he does on his personal time, and
Boo.
so maybe this was just their way of taking those witnesses out. But like I said, I didn't find any evidence for or against that. I tried to find these ATF agents' biographies to see, and I couldn't find anything. But so and that hit Justin, you saying that documentary was made by her, that just kind of says to me there's probably not a lot of basis behind it, more than just her being super right-winged and trying to tie it back to the Clintons more than what already is tied back.
I feel like McNulty did a pretty good job at dismissing any of that stuff with some decent evidence and really putting forth a good case that even though she might not be right about certain details about government involvement and what the FBI did, I mean, she might as well have been, given what actually is more likely to have happened.
Right.
I think that's all the main things I wanted to say. Was there anything else you guys were thinking of with regards to this?
One thing to point out, I don't know if you want to include it or not, but there was snipers, and one of the snipers there was,
the sniper from Ruby Ridge.
Yeah, he was the sniper that shot the wife at Ruby Ridge, and he had been convicted of murder, and somehow he was back on the scene shooting bullets.
Should this be like our cliffhanger to the next episode that we do together, and we'll do Ruby Ridge after?
Ruby Ridge is really interesting.
I'd be down for doing a Ruby Ridge episode.
I would be too.
I've done some research on that as well. But just to say, actually, you reminded me of something. So there were 3 sniper positions set up. I think they were all like Alpha Sierra, Beta Sierra. I don't know. I can't remember the names of them. But at one of those, the FBI testified that none of those sniper positions had made any shots, but they had found expelled shell casings at those sniper positions. So it's sort of like, well, maybe it wasn't the FBI making the shots, maybe it was someone else, or maybe they were lying.
Right.
It's not. You'd think they'd also clear up the shell casings too. So it's kind of weird. Why were they there to begin with? Because I don't know. That kind of confused me. But
right. It's all shady to me, all shady. And very least, like I said from the beginning, in the very least, the ATF wanted to put on a show, this big successful raid, like publicized event, whether it's to get more tax money, like get more funding and stuff like that, or just to take off some of the bad press from other incidences, such as maybe Ruby Ridge or something, make themselves look like the good guys again. So this initial raid fails, and then in the very least, the rest of it, like I said, was just them covering their asses. It was. It seemed to me like a revenge thing and an ass covering thing all in one. Like we're gonna go back, we're gonna get them, and we're gonna cover asses in the process. And so the whole thing was way more excessive than I think any of us seemed to think it needed to be. And whether, I don't know, there's a lot of weird stuff. Oh, we never talked about the Oklahoma City bombing, but I don't know if you want to.
I think that'll be kind of a long conversation.
I was about to say we can do like a rabbit trail with the 3 of us, and we can get into Ruby Ridge, we can get into the Oklahoma City bombing, and let it keep trailing on there.
I don't got time to keep rolling on too deep tonight.
No, I don't mean tonight. I mean future episodes for each one.
Yeah.
Right, definitely. So there's ties to other big theories like the Oklahoma City bombing, obviously, and Ruby Ridge, which are pretty big stories, but this, I don't know. Lots of people died. I don't think he needed to die. For me to summarize, just basically the most unfortunate thing to say after the deaths of these innocent children and people who should not, that were not David Koreshi, even if he was guilty. The American people ate it up. I mean, they wanted it to end so they could continue watching whatever TV shows they were doing. They were on the side of the government in this one. It seems really like, I'm hoping that, as I think we realized that tonight's the airing of that new miniseries, and we'll see how that turns out and if that changes any opinions on it. Since I didn't grow up during, I don't remember it happening. I came to it with fresh eyes, no bias, and what I saw was horrifying. So I recommend anyone listening, the best way to learn about it, because I do think Craig, Dan, and I did a pretty good job at getting the chief points across. There's a lot we did not cover that really brings the whole story together. But there's 3 documentaries. There's Waco Rules of Engagement. Then you watch Waco, A New Revelation. And then you watch the FLIR Project.
Those 3 documentaries include congressional testimony, witness testimony, evidence, timelines. And then there's a book, a phenomenally well-done book called The Davidian Massacre by Carol Moore. And she just did an incredible job with timelines, with there's a lot of good photographs in here, and just explaining. I mean, this book and those documentaries will teach you everything that I've learned. And I think they're well worth looking into to understand what they did to those people at Waco.
Right. And if you had little faith in the government before, once you watch this stuff, you'll have less faith. I want to say that this was probably close to the beginning of the 24-hour news cycle, which like I know like the Gulf War, early 90s was really, really publicized on the 24-hour news cycle. And then this had to have been like, none of us were really old enough to remember, but this had to have been like huge on this. And really, I mean, the media, you can tell they were just spinning it the whole entire time. It was just, obviously, if something like this is happening on U.S. soil, all they are doing is focusing, like you saw in the documentaries, just the vans lining the streets, the news vans, just down the roads. And I just imagine that, like you were saying, this had to have been spun in a way to make these people look like complete nut jobs.
Yeah.
And so, honestly, I have a hard time even knowing
the series is going to be spun that way too.
Right.
We'll see.
Well,
it might be.
It's hard to tell because like Netflix originals are starting to push away from like the mainstream and stuff like that. So it's really hard to tell. But I don't know. Honestly, after doing some of this research on both sides, I have no idea even what to believe at this point, because most people are just saying what the media has told them. Like, right. Well, this was happening, obviously, and obviously this was happening. It's like, well
yeah. And the thing is that either side of the story, like the media coverage for this one, it's a very sexy, compelling story. Like it's this intriguing thing where these crazy people did crazy things and we had to go and take them out. Like, and we've got witnesses who are saying that this guy was a psychopath, and we don't really focus on what actually went down or whether or not that was illegal, whether or not we had the right to burn them to the ground, or if we did, that type of thing. It's very, very interesting for sure.
So one final thing. If anyone wants to see some more really good interviews, just do a Google search for Scott Horton Waco. Scott's done a lot of good work on the subject. I mean, he was in Texas back in the 90s, grew up there. He was one who got me really looking into it to begin with, and I think he did a lot of really good work with that.
Here's the real conspiracy. Waco happened initially February 28th, 93. Bill Hicks was one of the big promoters of the flamethrower theory. Like, if you hear interviews of him, he was just like, clearly you can see flamethrowers like crashing into buildings, and it was mainly that video we were talking about. He's like, clearly you can see the flamethrowers, and he was on several interviews saying that the Clintons did it, and Janet Reno is responsible, the FBI is responsible. Like February 26, 1994, almost 1 year later, Bill Hicks dies of cancer at the age of like 33 years old.
Then what happened?
And then
Alex Jones enters
the scene.
This guy that comes out that looks like Bill Hicks comes out and looks...
One of his first big pieces was on Waco.
Yep.
And big full fan. Circle. Dan, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. I would like to do some sort of bonus content with this stuff, because tonight that we are recording this, not the night that it's airing, but the night that we are recording this is the night that the Waco series is premiering. So the three of us are going to get together. I'm planning, if we can, to break down the series as well, and we'll put that up in the bonus content. So if you guys want that, go join the Downers Club. But Craig, Justin, thanks for being here and shedding some light on a very compelling and interesting topic that most people totally overlook and totally miss, and it's very, very worth looking into for sure.
Happy to help.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, help spread the message. Let's, like I said, change the world together. Let's expand our thinking together. Let's work together to figure out what in the world this life is. Seriously. So please share the show with someone this week. Do them a favor, and maybe do yourself a favor by striking up a conversation with them or someone you disagree with. I know it's uncomfortable, but who cares? We're all going to die soon. Before we do, let's just change the norm a little bit. If you want a good, no-pressure place where you can practice having these civil disagreements, then come join our forum. It's an open forum on Facebook. It's totally free and a heck of a lot of fun. Just go in and search for The System Is Down Forum on Facebook, and I'll get you right in there. You can also support the show and get a bunch of weird bonus episodes by joining the Downers Club at tsidpod.com/support. One of the current weekly shows that we're doing is Craig, Justin, and I do a recap of the Waco miniseries that is airing now on Spike TV, and that show is just blowing my mind. So if you want to know what we have to say about the show and how it lines up with everything that we talked about in the Waco episodes, then go check that out as well. And if you've got a spare 3 minutes this week, please just go subscribe to the show on iTunes so you don't miss a single episode, and maybe leave us a nice review so new listeners know what they're getting into here. But thanks again, you guys. I really do appreciate you, and if you'll have me, I'll be right back here in your ears first thing next Monday with another uncomfortable conversation for you. Until then, question everything and stay uncomfortable. Thanks. This has been a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
This concludes our broadcast day. Click.